Unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the Unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional contexts. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever-changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.
I am a miracle made up of particles, and in this existence I'll stay persistent, and I'll make a difference, and I will have lived it. Aloha, aloha, ke akua, ke akua. Aloha. The day that I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am capable, I am powerful. The day that I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am on my way to a different place. I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am capable, I am powerful. The day that I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am on my way to a different place. The day that I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am capable.
Hi, you're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, a partnership between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a non-profit private institute of higher learning in Cape Town. For the past 4 years, more than 100 of South Africa's top thinkers, intellectuals, and social activists have shared their thoughts and insights with Cornerstone audiences about how to overcome some of our toughest social, economic, and political challenges. They've looked at issues such as gender-based violence, urban food security, and the impact of COVID-19 on higher education. These debates are now coming to you via this 2-hour radio show, as well as streaming via Facebook and YouTube. It will also be edited into a 1-hour podcast for listening at your convenience. Hosted by veteran journalist Ryan Fortune, it will see a rotating lineup of guests, speaking on topics such as community health and wellness, the state of African book publishing, the viability of a basic income grant in South Africa, policing and gangsterism on the Cape Flats, contemporary Khoisan conflicts, the pitfalls and opportunities in the current state of the internet, and much, much more. We hope you enjoy these discussions and encourage you to call in with your thoughts, ideas, questions, and solutions at Bush Radio on 021 448 3277 or message us on Bush Radio WhatsApp at 061 862 1065. If you are watching our live stream on Cornerstone's Facebook page or YouTube channel, please feel free to leave your comments there.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, listeners out there in Cape Town on this beautiful, beautiful Thursday evening. My name's Ryan Fortune, and I'm your host for the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. This is the 9th episode, and if you're here, I'm so glad you're here, so glad that you've followed us so far. It's been an amazing, amazing journey so far. Every day, every Thursday, when we do the show, this is it. This is the format. You may not know it, but this is it. It is a discussion, a deep dive into a particular topic that is of some newsworthiness at the present moment, or some critical issue that we've decided we want to investigate, explore, analyze, and just generally try to understand on a much more profound level than just sort of fleeting news headlines. And so the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues is tonight going to focus on Indigenous knowledge systems, reviving and celebrating our Indigenous knowledge systems. And to help us understand what all of that is, what that means in practice, is in the studio I have with me this evening. I have, let me start on the left, and then we'll go to the people outside who are actually not in the studio. But on my left, I have Luby Rush. Luby Rush, who is a South African, let's call it a food activist, but she's particularly an activist for indigenous foods and how we need to understand them better, to create awareness about them. She's been busy on this mission for over a decade now. And Luby, can you just tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing so far?
Yes, good evening, everyone. My mother remarried when I was 11, and she married an archaeologist. And it gave me the opportunity to go into the veld with him and dig in caves. And he told me about the various things that they found there that people used to eat. And it kind of tweaked my interest then already. So I heard about Watsonias and skilpadbetsies. And
how old were you at the time?
I was 11. So I was very lucky to, at that young age, already know that our landscapes are edible, even though I wasn't necessarily eating them. We did eat waterblommetjies, and we did, pick veldkool and make veldkool bread a bit and that sort of thing, but not very much at all. And then very much later, I'd been working as a landscape designer for 25 years, and I just felt that, for me to be spending my skill set on servicing a community that's already so privileged just didn't make sense when I saw actually what the issues of this country are, and I felt I wanted to reframe and do something more meaningful. And my other love has always been food. I've always loved food from when I was teeny. And so it was a very easy switch to go from local indigenous ornamental plants. I would always encourage my clients to plant local indigenous plants, in other words, winter rainfall, because so much of our landscaping in the Western Cape is done with summer rainfall plants, which is kind of self-defeating because then you end up still having to water them in the summer. And so the switch to food was an easy one, and I became involved with slow food, and I had a brand called Making Khoisan. I bottled things and sold them at market, and then gradually began to engage more and more with all the issues around indigeneity, around food sovereignty, around knowledge systems that are so incredibly lost. I started helping students to start researching because, the Western Cape's food are so under-researched in comparison to the indigenous foods from the rest of the country and up into Southern Africa. The summer rainfall foods are much better known, much better understood, and much more in use. And our Western Cape foods are somehow, just completely forgotten. The medicinals, yes, there's a very strong traditional knowledge base still in use. But the edibles, largely forgotten. So I've been working very much to try to draw people's interest in them and get farmers to grow them also because, traditionally they were foraged. They were never cultivated.
Okay, we're gonna catch up on all of that. And I see you've brought some fantastic food into the studio. And this is why I feel very lucky. This is going to be one of the best shows that I've done because we get to taste some food. It becomes a whole sensory experience, which is always great. But we're going to come back to all of that. I just want to introduce some of the other guests.
Crikey, I was supposed to only be introducing myself, and I went on a complete rant.
No,
Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. In the other guest in studio with me tonight is Glenn Arendse, who I've known for a very long time, since the days of Cafe Camisa in Kloof Street, performing at Monday Blues with a group that was starting out at the time called the Khoi Connection. This is back in the late 90s, is it not, Glenn?
Yep.
Yeah. Tell us a bit about the work that you've been doing for the past 2-3 decades now around music and...
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I think the work of Khoi Connection was kind of where it started and then kind of intensified, around this work with image, word and sound as performance poetry, but of course it morphed and is much more than that. So the level at which we went at it, taking performance anxiety on stage and then soundscaping with it and giving expression to the insecurities that we then, as people asking, who are we and what is our thing? And then we check out the bow is our thing. So, how come we don't know what our thing is? So it's to rediscover this thing that is our thing. So that became, the Khoi connection became a platform kind of for that. And I then did a bit of formal study that, shaped some stuff out of that, which kind of, with Khoi Connections work, not just as performers, but also as cultural activists and development practitioners, as it were. We designed some workshop material which included how to make and play a bow, with the humbleness that such a project requires, but by virtue of doing it with an open heart and open mind and with intent, I think we kind of got roots into a better understanding, and that is what I would like to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn, for that brief introduction. So the immediate sort of news hook for tonight's program is what is called Emancipation Day. And so Emancipation Day was yesterday. It's the commemoration of the freeing of 39,000 slaves in Cape Town in the year 1838. And it's a very significant day. It wasn't celebrated for a long time. I mean, when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't really a thing about Emancipation Day. Slavery was still a period shrouded in darkness, in ignorance, in the entire sort of narrative of slavery was really focused on the transatlantic slave trade. And so the Indonesian, intra-Indian Ocean slave trade wasn't really something that we studied at school. And it's only later that then we really, once you delve into that sort of, you have to make an effort to delve into that missing history of almost 200 years of slavery, where people were owned and all of that. And a large part of that community of people who were enslaved were the local Khoi people, because they didn't fit so well into the colonial imaginary at the time of just being slaves. And so but they were enslaved. They became sort of the Native Americans, in the same way that the Native Americans were sort of under the jackboot of the colonialists in North America. The same situation prevailed here, and actually they were the same company, I guess, because I mean we all know that New York used to be called New Amsterdam. So it was the same sort of philosophy of colonialism and displacement and terra nullius, that there was a vacant land here, and any person or plant or thing on the land belonged to the European colonial powers that had claimed it. So that's the history, that very painful, long history that was erased, that we are looking at, that is part of this conversation, that I guess is the framing of the conversation. Luby, you wanted to say something?
Yes. My husband works he does book layouts and publishing and that kind of thing on a small scale. And a few years back, he did a book called Grave Encounters. And it was all about those unmarked graves that are at Gallows Hill, and many of them slaves from elsewhere, as well as people that, that were brought down from the Karoo because they were doing, petty theft sheep. And that sort of thing. And, that it's so missing from our history that just, why? I mean, why was yesterday not a public holiday? Why are we actually not, why don't we know this history? It's such an important part of a kind of, it still runs in people's blood, that some or other how processing this kind of lineage that is still kind of working its way through our society, and we as you say, it's erased. It's critically important to engage
totally
with
erased. So Glenn, I mean, part of your work, so I guess for me the thing is, colonialism and slavery and all of that was really an attempt to almost erase people's cultural memory, their histories. We know that Christianity also played a huge part in that sort of erasure. There's a friend of mine called Johan Abrams who unearthed a book called Benighna, which is the story of a Khoi woman who was converted, and at the end of her life when she was in her 90s, the priest of the I think it was the Moravian church basically recorded her life. So it was the sort of the story of redemption from being a pagan, heathen, whatever, to Christianity. So she became this poster child. And there's a manuscript about this woman that I believe should be almost required reading, at schools. But anyway, this is where we are today. We're in a studio here with lots of food, and there's music, and there's also going to be celebration. But we have to look at these days. I mean, Glenn, would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how far back do we want to go? How far does memory stretch? If I just relate a project that the Khoi Connection was part of, and that part of towards the end of the project was thwarted by the advent of COVID. We were doing a stage play that looked at the German Southwest African presence or German presence in Southwest Africa and the genocide of Nama and Herero people. And you would know that it's very topical at this point, but what we did was to do some traveling through the south of Namibia, spoke to some of these people about the stories there, and went on and wrote this stage production. So this is sort of the topics where we're at, and the other to speak about emancipation. The other thing the Khoi Connection, for instance, was busy with was the production of a CD in order to raise funds for the people in the Kalahari that were at the time persecuted by the Botswana government, water not being made available. And
yes.
and water holes being covered.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's not a question whether we should celebrate this. It's about mindfulness. And when we do have this sort of thing that metaphorically is like waking up with a knop in your kop and loss of memory, that is like us, These gaps for everyone, no matter who you're from, within the confines of our divide and rule little Wookie, we were situated, and our limits on what we see is relevant to this proverbial elephant that each one has vantage on.
I mean, I've always wondered when I once discovered, I post high school, I went on some kind of a journey to understand my roots and my history, and discovered that I've got some people from Madagascar and people from Indonesia and Java, and like these things that weren't told to us or kept from us. And I've always looked at the group of people, let's call them the social group of people that I was designated, colored, as I always thought that part of the reason why that particular group is so challenged by issues of gangsterism, crime, violence is because we are ignorant of that history, or there's a certain sense of shame that goes along with the history of slavery or what happened here. But I mean, it's something that we have to, it's a kind of a trauma that we have to look at, because you're never going to be able to move forward or progress or heal your trauma unless you actually understand what happened. You know what I'm saying? So it's this kind of repressed trauma that is never going to go away. And so the issues of, alcoholism and, we can talk about the DOP system and all of those things, but I think also just the sort of the general, all the social problems that seem to afflict that particular group in particular. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's like if we look at just mental health, this is like a cesspool of stuff, emissions of stuff to inflict if one is not attent and attuned to these cardinal points, like you're suggesting, things we should be talking about and things that we should know about in order not to fall prey to these predispositions.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, we're gonna talk about all these things. Fascinating, long sort of this discussion that meanders into the past and the future, definitely. On the line a bit later on, we're going to be crossing to two other guests who can't be with us today. One of them is a gentleman called Basil Wilson, Brian Wilson, Dr. Brian Wilson. My apologies, Doctor, if you're listening, but he's out there listening to the show right now as we speak. He's going to be joining us. He's a veteran science and biology educator, and he's been advocating for a long time for the inclusion of some of these missing stories, these missing histories into the primary and high school education system. Then also we're going to be talking to Zandile Dumas, who is a woman who's based in Johannesburg. She is a social entrepreneur, and she's doing an MPhil. Let's look at it here. She's doing an MPhil at UCT in is it innovation? Let's see what it is. She's an MPhil in inclusive innovation at UCT's Graduate School of Business, exploring why and how Indigenous entrepreneurs in townships how they can integrate Indigenous knowledge systems into their ventures. She's advocating for IKS, Indigenous Knowledge Systems-led development, and her vision is to contribute to the design of ecosystems that integrate IKS into development processes that can stimulate and strengthen development, not just as a matter of economic redress, but for cultural and scientific resuscitation. That's a mouthful, but she's going to be joining us a bit later to talk about some of these issues, and from her perspective, what she would like to see happen and what she's studying. So that's Zandile Dumas on the line with us a bit later. Luby, I want to come to you.
Yes.
And the food.
Right. Well, I had a fabulous moment
Yes.
about 20 minutes ago where Sia, who works for Bush Radio,
Yes.
was chatting to me, having a look at what I've brought, this little tray full of plants that don't look particularly familiar. And he took a bite of the braxlai, and it immediately triggered a memory. And, I do quite a lot of workshops, and that sort of experience, when I take people on sort of foraging walks or that kind of thing, most people say, oh, no, I don't know anything. And then if you give them a sirang to nibble on, suddenly it's like this memory from when you were a kid and you went walking in the veld. It's like, oh, I know that. And, that kind of reclaiming, it's a fabulous moment when suddenly he grew up sort of up in the Karoo, in the Clan Karoo. And the braxlai grows there. And he probably hasn't thought of it, ever since he left there. And yet, if you just put that thing there, it can just trigger it back into life. And it was so nice to see him so excited. And I'm hoping that there will be a flavor and a smell here that's familiar to each of you as well, because that's such an important part of reawakening and reclaiming.
Glenn, you want
It kind of resonates somehow strangely, like what triggers memories. We played at the Market Theatre Lab once, and when we were done, one of the audience members came and suggested that aspects of the performance really kind of made him remember things that he didn't know that he forgot, the way he put it, right? So,
yes.
So I think whether it be through sounds that are almost like outside of our field of
reference,
gewaarwording, can enter through these little portals, sensorial maybe. But there's some primal thing, I think. Maybe
that happens there. Yeah.
And smell can do the same. Smell absolutely can trigger something which is so right in the back of your memory system, somewhere in your brain, and it can just be right there, and you're just aware again. Fantastic.
So Luby, tell me about some of the foods there that we have here. And so you've also have a book out, which is called, you see you have it in front of us there, in front of me there, Cape Wild Foods, A Grower's Guide, edition 2. Published in collaboration with the Sustainability Institute at Stellenbosch.
Correct, yes. Yeah.
And it's full of amazing pictures of preserves and foods growing wild in the fynbos. Wild cucumber, makatan, veldkool, spekboom, sea pumpkin. So these are all foods that grow in our environment that our forebears definitely used to eat before the advent of, I guess, slavery, or maybe and still do probably in some parts of the country.
Yes, that you will find num-nums and kai apples will trigger people's memories, and those are I've included some plants which come from the sort of crossover rainfall parts of the Cape, but my focus has largely been on the winter rainfall foods because they're the ones that somehow have been more forgotten. And I also included plants that would be very quick to bring into cultivation and could give a return to a grower fairly fast, whereas some of the things that are in here are like trees where, you know, it would take a very long time for them to become mature. But you could actually pick from them in an urban area and make use of the nutrition that they can provide, because there's, you know, we are a bit limited by accessing plants in the wild because there isn't actually a permitting system for plants, only for fish and shellfish and that sort of thing. So it's not easy to access foods in the wild, and I think that's part of why they've also been forgotten, because access to landscapes is just not there. And the knowledge sat in the landscape. I mean, if you're a farmer, you can take your seed with you and you can go and plant them and get going again elsewhere if you've been removed from where you came from. But if your knowledge sits in the landscape and you're removed from that landscape, you're removed from your knowledge base. And I think that's quite a significant kind of reason for why we've lost. I mean, added to that is also the sort of stigmas around poverty food and around feeling shamed about, you know, your indigeneity or your roots, which, I mean, all of those things are things that people need to grapple with and find a way to reconcile in themselves.
Yeah, and the food can help us do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
breaking bread together.
So before we get to the other guests, I mean, it's such a pity, guys, that you are not in the studio with us, Zandile and Dr. Wilson. But here in the studio we have with us. So explain to us what you've brought here.
Okay, so I've brought the two which are the sort of juicy plants that you could put into a salad. I've brought braksly. And there's another one which is very closely related to it, which is called sotsly, and you would find those on the coast as well as inland. So you'll find them in the Karoo. Sometimes they're called springboksly, sometimes it's scarpsly. So those are the two. And then the other one is sea pumpkin, and that one grows very much on the coast. So that one's got a very limited area that it likes to be, although we're managing to cultivate it quite a lot in other places. Then I've brought three kind of more aromatic herb plants. And so I've brought wild rosemary, and that's one which is sort of quite known because it's been used quite a lot in making shampoos and that sort of thing. Then there's wild sage, and then the other one is rose geranium. And those are the aromatic ones which people know the fynbos as being quite an aromatic landscape, and they're also kind of more medicinal. So yeah, I brought that range just because I had them on hand quite easily.
Glenn, do you think you maybe want to have a taste of what Luby has brought there, and then describe what you're tasting?
I've had a taste of the one of the, what was it? This one? Which was
sea pumpkin, yes.
Is that the sea pumpkin? What is that?
No, I think you chose something that you stuff in our mouth, and I'm not so sure what it was.
Braksly.
I think it was the braksly.
Braksly it was.
And common names are good because the brak tells you something about it.
It's brakwater.
But it's got a very unusual. You've never tasted that taste before. It's quite pungent, you know, in a way. But it
evoked a memory in Sia. I mean, it was just immediately. I know
very
that
juicy.
taste.
It wets, you know. If I had been thirsty, this would be. You know,
if you were trekking across a landscape somewhere and you came across this would help you to
if I'm just having a recreational. Smoke. That would be good to stay lubricated in this way.
Yes.
It grows in desert environments, which is amazing. I mean, it's the sort of adaptedness of the ice plant that enables it to grow in a place where it really looks like nothing should grow. There should be no food growing there. You know, our associations of what a food growing environment is also needs to be reframed.
Yes.
Because we think we need fertile soil with lots of compost. I mean, these plants grow somewhat just in virtually sea sand and poor soils. Very happily grow in those environments.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the kind of foods we grew up eating. I mean, what was the thing? The figs, the
suurvee,
you know, there was always you'd go out into the bush, play with your friends, forage really, and so this is these are the I guess the childhood activities that are also being lost, I guess, in this whole time of where it's not that safe for kids to be out and about and playing in the bush and all those kind of things. But they're experiences that I remember, in living in out Atlantis way years ago. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, listeners of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, we're talking about Indigenous knowledge systems, and in this particular segment, all about food with Luby Rausch, who is the author of Cape Wild Foods Growers Guide, which is all about the various foods that we find in our local landscape that we often ignore. We don't know about them. We're ignorant of them. And also with us in the studio is Glenn Ahrens, who is the founding member of the Khoi Connection. Before we go, I want to play some music. Or, well, no, let's ask Glenn to do something with the Khoi mouth bow, of which he is a practitioner, and maybe tell us a bit about the instrument and its roots and how it's been used over millennia, I would guess.
Thanks. Yeah, I think this is an important opportunity as it gives one the opportunity to speak to some of the things that one find in the confines of your own little exploratory mind. So some of the things that are coming out of being a practitioner is like what's implicit in that. I'm trying to write up and working on a format of how to present it. It's like sort of towards a master's in anthropology, but it will be to formulate some of these ideas that are emerging around the bow, which I'm framing around the bow as a anti-racism project, because of how deep we go is to get to the first racism, dehumanization. And rehumanization, becoming human again, is a physical and active and practical thing. And the bow presents, in so many ways, a spot to put your toe to get a hook on something, to get a vastra plek ergens and have a coherent view around you, no matter how you change shape or where you. There's this frame of reference, and the bow is I'm discovering an amazing tool and implement that in the framing of it as work to be done around anti-racism. It is basically restoring essential human qualities in the Bushman by virtue of reconstructing the people of the bow by imagining the bow, looking at the bow, what it is, not just as a boegie and looking at it with a pap oogie, but deconstructing what it is physically as an implement, a scientific tool to launch a projectile, the science that goes into that. I mean, there's deep science about what makes a bow pliable or bowable, or what makes an arrow arrowable or a point stickable, and they had that down, right? So when we thoroughly step into this racism, we need to wake up that if this was a lie, then who are we then? What is there for us to assume? What can we step back into? And I feel if we step back into the bow, for instance, we step into the scientific mind, the scientific cosmology or cosmogony that one can construct out of this to really get to who these people were, if they weren't little almost human beings, or not quite there, but nowhere. To understand racism as something way, way more than skin, the bow renders that opportunity. It's a tool for education, it's a tool for music making, it's a tool for living, it's a scientific laboratory tool as a monochord to establish the relationship between frequencies, between numbers. There's a host of stuff from when I look at people looking at IKS inclusion in the curriculum, they must have a field day, I mean, it's a rich territory to and I'm just looking at the bow. I mean, look at the food and all of that, right? So it's some amazing stuff that is coming out of this.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack, for people who have never heard the bow, what is it? Just, or have no idea. Just explain to us what we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the bow is basically a single string, right? You may know the famous poem of the broken string. The lament was more like the song of the broken string, but like the lament, which goes about this singular string, and one can place the bow within the musical family, and whether it's a precursor to the what's a lyre, or like as a single string, but so there's that aspect to it, but I think just describing it physically, it's a single string, torn over two ends. Physically, a hunting bow, turned the other way.
Into a musical instrument.
And then using the mouth as a resonator, because the instrument itself is very personal. It's very in my skull, very for me. That's why part of my sort of formal studies is in psychology. And a lot of my stuff has to do with this thing concerning myself, also with mental health issues and how to respond to that. And one of the ways for me is in my formulation of the bow as a tool to sustain or to retain or to reclaim some frequential niceness, some place of being, which I think that recalibration or
that
calibration that we require can come from each one making their own bow and playing that bow so that the frequencies fill the chamber of their own crevices in the skull, in the throat, in the chest, and so on, and heal and explore what lies within the healing dynamic of indigenous knowledge systems. What is there? What is the healing in the healing music? How do I understand the bow if I'm going to play now? How do I understand the rhythmic textures that are conjured for it not to stultify, nor to structure in a rigid way, but just to unlock and then to free to go, you know. So there's a lot to say about African music, but then there's very little sometimes to say about Bushman and Khoi music within African music and how it differs from an out and out description of this is African music. We find how there's variance in needing to understand this sort of and I mean the bow is a strike instrument, so it's got a string and you need to it's like up and down strokes. So the use of the bow currently in whichever form, many composers use it because you can it's got a melodic and a rhythmic dynamic to it. And harmonically, you can come and play around with the tones that are there and then go to the piano and go and check out with the guitar or what. So it's an exploratory thing, you know. But for me, I think I like to approach it in a broader sense of with a healing that the dictum that each child should have a drum, and that we are uniquely rhythmic as human beings, so we need to play. I want to extend and say each one should have a bow. Like in the world, everyone should have a bow and play it.
Yes, 100%.
So okay, so I'm gonna toggle my string here, and just conjure something. I approach it as a journey, right? So I just journey. So you're free to come along.
Okay, go for it.
See, these things are very temperamental, so I brought two, just so that. All right, I'll use this one. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. It takes you back to some really primal place, eh? Yeah, it's like you can feel yourself being transported back in time and space.
There's something interesting about this particular when I discovered this particular composition, because it was in literature that revealed how the bow was used as a lead instrument in choral singing, like the equivalent of the choir, or so it was an instrument for accompaniment. So it helps one to better understand how to approach this representation.
Amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about indigenous knowledge systems in South Africa and how we are celebrating them, reviving them. We have in the studio with us Glenn Arendse, a cultural activist around Khoisan music and memory, and we have Luby Rush, who is should we call you a food activist these days? I think that's the correct appellation. Luby, quickly. I first discovered you were doing these foraging journeys where you took people on sort of trips into the wild, and tell us a bit about that. Are you still doing that? How does it work?
Yes, I do those kinds of walks, and for me, it's a very important part of kind of switching people on to using a part of themselves that it's so easy to just have it completely dormant in modern day life. I mean, foraging it's not really legal to forage in the wild for plants, but that mechanism of actually really looking and really reconnecting to where you are, and really in a deep way getting to know where you are. You know, we walk around blind. We drive, we stop at a stop street and turn left and right, and on a good day we might, lift our heads and look at the mountain and think how beautiful it is. But in terms of the kind of really, when you walk at a walking pace and you stop and you look, I mean, anyone who's had children will know that if you take your children out walking, you never get very far, because they are so busy stopping and looking at what they find along the way. And that part of ourselves as humans, modern life has just kind of disconnected us from. And I think that a lot of that kind of yearning to reconnect, and why people want to do these kind of foraging things, is in order to reconnect with the place where we are and get to know it again.
Definitely. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're talking about: reconnection through food, through music, as we look back on a sometimes quite painful history of erasure, brainwashing, sort of just a general invisibility of particular cultures that existed in Southern Africa for millennia. I think one of the things that that's also struck me, and has always struck me in trying to understand the history, or or unpack, I guess, the false history that we've been told, and especially in the context of things that we have now, like climate change and all of this. Often, when we think about an issue like climate change, it's usually split between people who look at the issue from the perspective of there's going to be some technology that people are going to invent, electric cars, all of that, or we're going to be able to basically avoid the cost of our 200, which isn't a very long time in the span of human history, but about 300 years of basically pillaging of the planet, with our sort of techno society that we've built over the last only 200 years. Sounds like a lot, but it's actually very short. And the people who lived here quite successfully and in harmony with nature, that we, I guess, have labeled backward and primitive and savage, but yet what they had and they had this innate, they're exactly physiologically human, exactly like us. They're modern human beings, but they obviously had made different cultural choices, which was to live in a different way, to what I would guess the so-called modern people live by, the values and the principles that they live by. And it's always struck me when people say, there's no hope for the world. Human beings are just greedy and violent and destructive, and we all the same way. It's part of human nature. But then I said, by saying that, you are denying the humanity of a huge section of the world population who did not live, were not greedy and competitive and totally set out to destroy everything around them in the way that we do. And they did so for tens of thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years, if you look at the archaeological record. And so we need to be looking at what they had, the tools that they used, to figure out, how we can also progress and maybe, and not be bedazzled by all of these techno things, trying to go to Mars now, with some big rocket. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ryan Fortune. I'm your host, and we're talking Indigenous knowledge systems. We're going to take a song right now by he's the same guy who sang earlier, if you were with us from the beginning, a guy called Nako Bear. And this song is called Great Spirit. And it's a beautiful song. I hope you enjoy it.
Will you feed? One makes you strong, one makes you weak. And those who know and those who seek. Amidst the chaos, find your peace. I know it's your old 5 feet. I know it's your old 5 feet. Way of weaving through the damage, mindful, stay mindful. Great Spirit, for my sisters, let me be a flowing river. Flood the banks, the rocks that bind her, carry, I'll carry. Great Spirit, oh, wow, great Spirit. Great Spirit, for my brothers, let me be a mountain under which he climbs to discover his process. Now that's progress. Great Spirit, all that hinders, tie reminders to my fingers. I must speak with you more often. Great Spirit. Oh, wow, great Spirit. Oh, wow, Great Spirit, for my relations, give them strength to face racism in every single situation. Easy now, wanna speak loud. Great Spirit, take me instead, guide me down the road of red and Kashala. I am shade praying. Oh, Kashala, yeah. Kashala, yeah. Kashala, collapse, nothing but the earth will last, and I'll be singing sweetly into the darkness. Thou art this great spirit on my tongue. Be still, be still. The time will come when everyone will sing. All life is sacred. While I'm waiting, great spirit, my fist is up, bringing the power to the people. Your reflection of us. Some of your people can't hear it, the cries of the earth. Some of your people can't feel it, the way that it hurts, and it hurts. A great spirit, oh, and it moves, great spirit. Interconnected in the wreckage of a paradigm on its way out. Its way out. Speaking of spiritual, lyrical testimonies, a spirited lyricist, weaving around false prophecies. Spirit directed and selective with the message I bring. While the ship slowly sinks, I've been directed to sing. I'm like a wrecking ball, breaking down the walls of the past. I'm in a bliss, living a bliss with the last of my cash. You're gonna be justified with how you treated the land. You're gonna be by my side when I stand in the mirror to change. Change. Hey,
Nako Bear and Great Spirit song. Nako Bear is a Native American singer, performer from North America, and he's singing about the Great Spirit that envelops everything, kind of a religiosity that I can feel a certain affinity towards, and I guess a lot of people increasingly do as well. If you're in the studio and you're watching us right now, if you're watching us on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, you will notice that in the studio there are people who are busy eating. I would call it stuffing their faces with some food. But the food is probably like nothing you've ever seen. You've probably seen it, but you didn't think it was edible. It probably looked like some things growing on the side of the pavement and growing out of the cracks in the pavement. And look at Glenn. Look at his smiling face. He's happy as a clam. Eating this food that's this indigenous food. Tell me about the preserves that you've got here, Luby.
So I brought along 2 bottles made using kai apples. So kai apples are a round yellow fruit that grow naturally around kind of Addo Elephant Park, that part of the world.
The kai.
So it's kind of crossover rainfall kind of part of the country, but they are grown a lot here around Cape Town, planted at the edges of public parks. A lot of municipal plantings, I've got them, so you can easily find them. Once you get to recognize them, you can absolutely find them and forage them perfectly legally because they're planted in an urban area.
Amazing.
But then they're also planted a lot. They're terribly thorny. They've got these massive thorns. And so they're used a lot as security hedge planting on farms and that kind of thing. And they're an interesting plant because the male and the female flowers are on separate plants. So you have to plant more than one in order to make sure that the pollination happens and the fruiting happens. And sadly, they tend to grow only the male ones because they don't want the fruit. And I just think, yes, how sad. Because I mean, they really are. I make so many different things from kai apples. I make a cordial, and I fermented them to make vinegar, and fantastic chutney. They're a really great local
so tasty.
orange. And that what you're
Something
having
else.
there is just this kind of jam. So it's got the most pure sort of flavor of it. And your snoek with kai apple smeared on it instead of appelkoos jam. Then we're using our own fruit.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can see that.
Amazing. We've been trying to get hold of our other guests on the phone, but I'm having a problem trying to get hold of them for about a few times. They're on WhatsApp. I can reach them, but when I try to call out, it goes to no. It says no. This number is not available, or this number doesn't exist. So Zandile and Brian Wilson, if you're out there, Dr. Wilson, please be patient with us. We're going to try again in a few minutes' time. But yeah, it's a technical problem, obviously, that we're trying to sort out. So. The book that you've compiled, tell us a bit about that. That is it's a guide for all of where one can find these foods, what they're about, and tell us about the book.
So it's called The Grower's Guide because I'm trying to encourage these foods to be cultivated so that we don't go walking into the veld and just willy-nilly picking things in the wild, because our landscapes are quite threatened already by farming and by urbanization. So protecting what we have, or rather looking after what we have, is very important, and then beginning to grow them in a different way so that we start kind of capturing an agriculture which is suitable for our landscape, and not this kind of agriculture that came here with people who came here 500 years ago and brought their foods and their systems of agriculture with them. Right. So this is a guide which is really trying to encourage people to start growing them in ways where it fits in with the land. So it's growing things where they come from. So and understanding what the needs of the plant are, so that you don't have to overly water, overly improve the soil. Just grow things where they like to be, because then it's just so much easier to grow them.
Right. I think the water-wise aspect of it that always stood out, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And the fact that, a winter rainfall plant likes to have rain in winter. It has a hell of a time in summer, and the plants have had to become very adapted because, most of the world, the rain falls in summer and the major growth spurt is in summer. And here in the Western Cape, it's dry and hot in summer. So the bruxlei and the ice plant have had to adapt to that and are adapted to that. So actually we have a huge resource of plants from a climate change perspective that are actually incredibly adapted to tough conditions and the kind of conditions that we're finding ourselves moving into as we've hit our planetary boundaries. So I get very excited about being here, because we've got 10,000 plants in the Cape Floristic region, and many, many, many of them have not been
studied understood
enough to actually understand. I mean, I could start sprouting off about a couple of them, but I won't bore everybody with it. But there really is hope for using our own local foods in a way in which is much more efficient than the kind of way in which we're doing agriculture at the moment.
Definitely, lots to think about, people. I see there's a lot. There's also quite a few things going on in the sort of space of right now of memory, of looking back and sort of celebrating our past. I saw Denisha, a friend of mine, Denisha Anand, who had a talk at TEDx. Yes, she did a TEDx talk, and Denisha is a fantastic environmentalist, a young woman who has really taken on the reins and helped to turn around the Princess Flay Forum. And if you didn't know, if you're someone who lives out there in Grassy Park or on that side of the world, Retreat, Bishop Lavers, and you should know that Princess Flay is actually named that way after a Khoi princess who was, legend has it, captured by the Dutch colonists. She was bathing in the Flay, and she was a princess, and she was captured and enslaved at that time. So that's the story of Princess Flay, but an iconic place for a lot of people. If you grew up in Cape Town and used to frequent that area, as a sort of a resort, and over time it became degraded and not well looked after and sort of abused. And Denisha is one of the custodians of that space, along with quite a number of other people. But I think one of the things that she said at the TED Talks was that Indigenous peoples had this were custodians of the land, and they kept it safe and clean, and so this is why, for me, the thing, I think we were speaking about this earlier on, the need to go back and understand what these our ancestors, other human beings exactly like us, not primitive, not backward, actually probably far more advanced than we are in terms of how they dealt with other beings on the planet, and so we need to really understand what they were doing in order to figure out how we should behave. Would you agree with that, Libby?
Absolutely, I would agree with that. And there's a kind of technology that would have been in place to make use of the foods that were found here. For example, the Western Cape is the carbohydrates are not got from grasses; they are got from bulbs and corms and rhizomes and so forth. And the kind of technology that would have needed to be developed to make use of some of those in order to make them more palatable and more digestible. Some of them, yes, you could eat some of the eentjies, just like that, soet eentjies, some of those names allude to the fact that they were very tasty, just as they were. But some of them you actually needed to put into fire, or you needed to, wash in salt water for a period of time. Those wild almonds needed to actually get, they needed to be washed, otherwise they were not good for our systems. So some of that sort of very early technological, it's a technology, how to transform something with fire. It's one of the early things that would have come out of here. And also, and a lot of those foods were growing on the south coast here, sort of Agulhas Plain, where a lot of those caves where some of the very, very early creative acts, like, the markings that were made, and so forth. That's hundreds of thousands of years old. And those technologies then left Africa and spread to the rest of the world. The sort of birth of modern creative man happened here. Based on the marine foods and the coastal foods that people ate. We can't, in a way, we need to go back, yes, in order to reclaim some of that, but we also have to face the fact that we're now a hell of a lot of people on this planet, and we can't actually do things in the same way as they used to be done, and we need to find new ways with old things. And in a way, I feel like your music is a little bit like that as well, that there's a sort of something quite primordial about cooking with fire or making music with very simple instruments. Yeah. But we need to find new ways forward because we live in a difficult time.
Yeah, I think that's correct, because I think it's like a search for another type of space, a space that touches on the infinity in some way, a source, something that is inexpendable. And in a way, this music becomes that. The elements that one discovers that makes up the music, the structure of it, is like 26 letters, and you can write countless novels with it. So there's this Tetris thing that possibly work with structural design within the music, for instance. And what one finds is this trajectory of, like, let's say one looks at the natural development of the Bushman and Khoi in respect to music, and then you add this groot koms, right, and it just goois everything through mekaar. At what juncture can one imagine were they progressing musically in terms of the insights at the time that were developing through the making and playing in the way that they do? What intellectually, where did they go? If one looks at polyrhythmic aspects that are known, where do they pull in its complexity towards this trance that is inherent in the uneven meter, the heartbeat, the 3 against 2 or 4 in the polyrhythm, and then the 5, so they discovered there was this 5, a count of 5, for instance. So what I'm trying to say is there's this exploration, and the more you come into this terrain, you find, but this is like a veld full of food. This is like this is a terrain of like you just breathe deeper. You almost transform to just for a minute touch on something that is infinite, and when you play and you dabble in this infinity and project it, and it's found to be edible. Audibilities,
edible. Yeah.
It's a similar sort of thing. One kind of want others thing, to reach this space, which is not metaphoric. It's not an abstract space.
Absolutely,
and
it's
really allowing it to manifest.
Yeah. I just want to mention something. I mean, I speaking about music and food and culture and all of this. I mean, one of the things that I was fortunate enough, let's say fortunate enough to experience, is I went to a place called Gabon in the year 2007, and Gabon is quite a unique country on the planet. It's 40 different tribes of people, all very distinct from each other. 40 different tribes. Some people are, and only 2 million people, 2-point-something million people, but divided into 40 different tribes. More than 50% of them still live in the jungle, in this tropical rainforest. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And you just see these giant plants and trees and this dense jungle, it's like the Amazon in West Africa. And so that sort of equatorial African band over there. And I was there I was there to shoot a documentary that I was busy with. But one of the interesting things that happened is that I discovered that there's this plant that grows there, and I know that this was in 2007, but there's obviously been this whole resurgence now into the use of psychedelic plants to mushrooms and various other things, ayahuasca, to give people new insights, sort of take them back into some ego death, basically. And one of the things that I discovered, there was this plant called iboga. Now you can go and Google this. You can go and look it up. It's called iboga. But what happens is it's part of the national religion of Gabon called Bwiti. And so Bwiti is this sort of syncretic mix of, it's like a type of a voodoo type of religion, mix of African religion and Roman Catholicism that was brought there by, I guess, the French or some people who colonized Gabon. And it was interesting that there was this plant that only grows in that area, in Equatorial Guinea, Cameroon, and a couple of other places in that area. And this plant is used as a tool to initiate people into this religion. It's like, And I was, being the curious type of journalist, type of person that I am, I thought, well, this is something that I would like to experience. It was an absolutely amazing journey into my own mind, into my own psyche. I had sort of visions of past and future, my ancestors. It was a whole thing. And then but one of the things that was quite interesting for me is the fact that it is used. It is very effective as a tool to interrupt drug addiction, right? So people often go there, and they're using it a lot in North America as a way to interrupt drug addiction, especially for people who are heroin addicts, because it cuts all your sort of cravings off. Yeah. So, I mean, we all have cravings for certain things, whether it's for food or cigarettes, alcohol, and whatever. And after my experience with this plant that grows in that area, my experience with the plant is that for about 2 or 3 weeks after that, I had absolutely no desire to smoke a cigarette, have a drink of alcohol. All I wanted to do was drink water and be, And the thing is that the people in that part of the world have used this plant as a tool for thousands of years. I guess they got it from the pygmies who live in the jungle, who discovered that this was the thing. And for me, it was so striking that this is an African technology. It's medicine. Yeah, and it's there, and the West is obviously looking at it as a tool to deal with their issues. But it's something that exists. The Western Cape the country has a huge problem with drug addiction.
And think of Tuk, for example, which is so cheap.
Yes.
It's so available.
Yeah, and the sort of the normal rehabs that you have a very poor success rate, let's be honest. And this particular plant that is an African indigenous plant doesn't even grow anywhere else out of the continent. It's impossible to cultivate anywhere else because it needs those warm temperatures. And here it is, and we still sort of, let's take people through, Anyway, so what I was saying is just that I'm saying that we are so ignorant of the technologies that are right at our fingertips that we could be making use of to deal with some of the issues that we face.
Well, the one plant that comes to mind as you were speaking there is it's a Cercia family, which they're Kraibesi, Rusenkibos, Taibos. There are about 380 of them across South Africa. And they make little berries that are very sour. They're related to Mediterranean sumac, which is used very actively in the Mediterranean countries as a culinary spice. Quite sour. And it's not been nutritionally tested here at all. 380 of them around the country. So it's summer rainfall, winter rainfall, little bushes, big trees. And it's written in the sort of ethnobotanical records that just a few handful of those little berries could sustain a bushman in hunting down large game for hours on end. And we haven't studied it at all, and I mean, and that's only the one plant. I mean, there are so many other, there's a bit of work that's gone around, scaletium, for example, which is, now being made into pills and that kind of stuff. So certain types of plants that somehow I think can be made money out of in the sort of pharmaceutical world, for example, get quite a lot of attention, and can we make some money from export and that kind of thing. But the actual more important sort of root of our connection to our plants from here is the one which is just so underconnected with. And I really do hope to see that changed, that we engage so much more with what we have here.
That's why the interface between the virtues of these domains of indigeneity and the technologies in it, interfacing it with centers of needs, rehabilitation centers or spaces where,
we need,
for growth and development along some sort of line. It's very good to bring these virtues then into
the space. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. I was going to say Cape Foods, Cape Collective, something Cape Koi, something. The Cornerstone Critical Dialogues every Thursday night. Tonight we're having a very deep discussion around indigenous knowledge systems and how we could be celebrating them, reviving them, how we need to open our eyes to the richness that surrounds us in this place and time that has been erased or ignored, that actually stares us in the face in a lot of ways. I'm going to play some music now because I want to come to Dr. Brian Wilson, who's in Stellenbosch and is waiting for us to call him, but I'm going to make another effort at that. Just for now, we are going to play a song called Medicine for the People. Again, Nako Bear.
Lend your ears, lend your hands, lend your movement, anything you can. Come to teach, come to be taught, come in the likeness and the image of God. 'Cause you can be like that, with all that humbleness and all that respect. All the power invested in me. Beat hard to love my enemies. All of the black bags over the heads of the dead and dying. The more I understand about the human race, the less I comprehend about our purpose and place. And maybe if there was a clearer line, the curiosity would satisfy. Time-based prophecies that kept me from living in the moment. I am struggling to trust the divinity of all the gods and what the hell they have planned for us. I cry for the creatures who get left behind, but everything will change in the blink of an eye. And if you wish to survive, you will find the guide inside. I go back and forth every single day. The clarity, it comes to me in the choppy waves. The feelings, the places, the seasons change. The galaxies remain. Energy fails upon the body to space. The angels that accomplish the spiritual waste. The hate that gets me displaced from my spiritual base. Tenfold I'm on when the planets are placed in polar alignment. We're on assignment. Bodies on consignment. Return them to the circus. And what is the purpose? What is the purpose? And would you believe it? Would you believe it if you knew what you were for and how you became so informed? Bodies of info performing such miracles. I am a miracle made up of particles, and in this existence I'll stay persistent and I'll make a difference, and I will have lived it. Aloha, aloha, keakua, keakua. Aloha, aloha, kuleana, kuleana. Aloha, aloha, keakua, keakua. Aloha, aloha, kuleana, kuleana. I'm not a leader, just a creature, seeking the features of a teacher. Where do you follow, where do you lead? All the mysterious ways of nature, and I'm into it. I'm into it. Changing management. And there are various ways to conquer this monotonous metropolis. My stubbornness is bottomless, my fearlessness is talking shit, and I'm wide awake. I'm wide awake. And I'm taking names. Do you speak to me like you speak to God? All the love and understanding between the Father and the Son. Do you believe in the perfectness of where you are? These are my people, these are my children, this is the land that I would fight for. My solidarity is telling me to patiently be moving the musical medicine around the planet in a hurry, cause there's no time to wait. I gotta wake up, my baby's time to stand up and say we know what we are for and how we became so informed. Bodies of info performing such miracles. I am a miracle made up of particles, and in this existence I'll stay persistent and I'll make a difference, and I will have lived it. Aloha, aloha, keakua, keakua. Wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am capable, I am powerful. The day that I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup, I am on my way to a different place. I don't wake up and transcend the holy makeup. I am capable, I am powerful.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Yes, so Dr. Wilson, are you on the line? Can you hear me? I can hear you, Ryan. Can you hear me? Yes. Can you hear me there, Glenn? Okay, there we go. I think that's on. Are you there, Dr. Wilson? Okay, what's going on? Let's see. Are you there? What? Yes. There now. Can you hear me? Now? I can hear you. And can you hear me? Yeah. No. No. Now? Yes, I can hear you. No. I can hear you. No. I don't know what's going on there. Okay, for some reason we are having issues connecting with Dr. Wilson. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues on Bush Radio 89.5 FM. We just lost Dr. Wilson there. We're trying to get hold of him. We're going to try again in the next 5 minutes or so. Hopefully we can get him before the end of the show. But we're talking about all these things about the ways in which our history and our indigenous knowledge has been erased. And we are basically often, I think, walking in a sort of a fog of not really understanding where we come from, how we got here, where we're going, and I think the plants that we eat, often are ways of the plants that we eat, the music that we listen to, are the spaces we move in. The spaces we move in are ways in which we can reconnect with a past that has been kept away from us. We're going to try and call Dr. Wilson again. Let's try this again.
While there's a little gap, I'll just fill it in with a little thought. And I think that the other thing that keeps us very disconnected is the way that our global economy works, and that a kind of sharing economy doesn't exist. And I think that some or other how we need to find our way back to that, the way in which communities work together, and the way in which not everything is seen from a financial point of view, but that things are valued in different ways. And I think that that's also something that we need to address.
Definitely. Glenn, so how's it been going with Khoi Connection and the music that you've been creating? What is the impact of
Well, I think you mean the impact of the
music. What I'm talking about is like when you are out doing your workshops and people encounter the bow for the first time, and sort of as a way of reconnecting, as you say. Yes. What is the effect on the individual once they sort of get close to that?
Wow, it's kind of it's remarkable in that, without exception, you find people being able to get into that space I suggested, where you gain access to something that is just immediately almost like magical. That responds to one, and you just get a sense that this is like a stallion that you want to tame. This is something that is at the same time like a zebra that you would never be able to tame. There's like, you have to accept this sort of wildness of what is conjured by the bow and this approach to striking it. There's something about the rhythmic aspect to it, So I think when one looks at, for instance, the music, there's always this healing dynamics in it that one expects from a trance dance around a fire, a healing dance. But then you also have the music functioning for a real dance, you know what I mean? So there's a celebration, like you said. We need it's like a reviving and a celebration of what there is. So in the music itself, there's a lot to celebrate, and there's a lot for contemplation and healing and trancing and so on. So some of the stuff that I personally had been involved in was, in fact, there's a group that came together known as to put a project together known as Khoisan, which is basically a bunch of local excellent musicians that have put some of these ideas together that can start to have a feeling of, this is us, ons is goed, dis is a ding, and you hear it without, it stands out. So
Yeah.
Yes. I think we're finding to start to fuse and put this.
Yeah, 5 minutes.
To
2
put
minutes.
this potpourri, this thing together.
Yeah. Glenn, we've just got Dr. Wilson on the line now.
Hooray!
Yes, Dr. Wilson, are you there? Oh, can we hear him?
No, I said hooray too soon.
Yeah, we can hear him. Can you hear him there, guys?
No, I can't hear him.
Hello.
Okay, there is a message for you, a technical message.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know what's going on.
Community
Hello?
Champions is a new show on Bush Radio every Thursday
Yes.
at 9 p.m.
Why is it off?
Cornerstone Institute CEO Noel Daniels is the host and
Yes.
chats with various community champions about their life, their work, their struggles, and the music that inspires them to keep fighting for a better world. Conversational and laced with humor, the show is part of a new collaboration between Bush Radio and Cornerstone Institute, a private institute of higher learning in Cape Town, offering a range of on-campus and online programs in community development, psychology, business, and much more. If you're looking for inspiration on how to change the world, tune in to Community Champions on Bush Radio 89.5 FM with Cornerstone CEO Noel Daniels every Thursday at 9 p.m.
All right, sure.
So finally, we've got Dr. Wilson on the line. Hi there, Dr. Wilson. Can you hear me? Hello. Dr. Wilson, are you there? Are you there, Dr. Wilson? I don't know. Is he still there? Is he left? Dr. Wilson, are you there? Oh, yeah. I think he may have dropped the call. Yeah, technical problems tonight, ladies and gentlemen. For some reason, it's not a good evening for me and on the show. But we've been having issues trying to get hold of people. Either the line's not working or we can't hear them or something's going on. Nonetheless, the conversation remains interesting in the studio with Luby Rosh and Glenn Aronser, who are with me for the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues, and looking at Indigenous knowledge systems and how they have been reviving them and celebrating them. There's lots going on in the space this evening. I believe also is Sylvia Vollenhoven, who's also an old friend of mine, and a lot of people in Cape Town who has a show going on called the Kritoa, which is also a look back at history and where we've come from, and the sort of painful history and of a young Khoi woman in the Cape in colonial times. So these are all things that we should be exploring. We should be going out there. We should be making an effort. If you are a person of color, grew up on the Cape Flats, you really should make the effort to go to the Slave Museum in Adley Street if you have never been there, because that's where you may find your surname on the wall there. I mean, I remember going there a few years ago and seeing my surname, Fortune, was on one of these slave surnames, and so these are things that we don't often think about, but the traces of our past are all around us. You know, in the names, in the people, in the music, in the artifacts that we're surrounded by. And here in the studio, we've been talking about food and music. we were going to get to Dr. Brian Wilson and also Zandile Dumas in Johannesburg, but it seems that we're almost running out of time to try and sort out this technical problem with the phones and all of that. I'm going to keep it going in the studio with Luby. Luby, so tell me something. So people want to find out what is a good way to begin to go onto a journey around food, to rediscovering your sort of culinary forgotten history?
Well, I think the one thing which people should explore while they have elders in their families who still hold some knowledge, to capture that, because those elders are old and we are losing them. And so what knowledge is still there to be passed on, I think, is the one very, very good place to start if you have elders in your family or amongst your friends.
Yeah.
Then in terms of a food journey, I think the other thing that we need to do, also just as modern people living on a planet that has reached its boundaries, is to challenge ourselves to step out of our habits, to step out of our food habits, to step out of our habits of always having a ceiling over our heads and actually going out and looking at that night sky and reconnecting to where we are. So I think all of those things that can just reconnect us to where we are and to what we may have even have done as children that we've forgotten about. And then when we find things that are from here, engage with them. Engage with the music that we have here. Engage with a food that is from here, that, you know, we're so stuck in our habits and we turn our noses up to things and we want things that were always the way they were, even though they might be very short memory. So really to be prepared to challenge ourselves, to shift from our stuck places. It can even be our angry stuck places, that the way in which that our reactions are to our difficult pasts can be to be angry about them and to actually move on from them and find new ways of processing things that can incorporate and shift the sort of patterns that keep repeating themselves, that hold us in negative places.
I guess that's what it is. It's about the patterns that we've been conditioned into, and
including shame, including hanging on to shame.
Yes. No, definitely. I mean, as I was saying earlier on, this whole history, I mean, of slavery, 200 years. Can you believe it? Can you believe it that you have to confront the notion that your forebears, your forefathers, your ancestors were for 200 years. They were the property of some other people, and they were generations of human beings in your family were kept as goods by another group of people. So I think there's a huge sense of shame attached to that, even to acknowledging that. And I mean, before we even get to the question of am I Khoisan or not, you know, I mean, we know from growing up, and we'd always see the pictures of the Caucasian ancestor, you know, sort of elevated above everyone else, and in our own families, you know, are sort of what was the word? It's a derogatory word these days. Whatnot. You know, the whatnot side of your family was sort of always suppressed, and you know, the sense of negativity around that, and now it's time now to I guess I mean, it's a long time past overdue that we should actually be engaging with these issues, Glenn.
Yeah, I mean, it's you mentioned long overdue, but it's euphemism for maybe a stronger way of putting it, which I won't now. But I can't imagine how we are not, given the weight, given our cornerstone position within crimes against humanity, that up until this point, no one was moved. You know, like no one was moved to burn themselves up for it. No one was prepared to set fire to something in order for us to get through this towards locking out of this pattern. There are some patterns to break and some patterns that we want to get back to. And what are patterns? And not falling stuck into romanticizing about ur patterns and just for its own sake. So I think in a way what one has here with Indigenous knowledge systems, it speaks back to rite of passage for youngsters. If we don't have rite of passage, we can just like blast hot air and kry lekker, get off on it, and then like just be ineffectual as well. So within, for instance, the bow and the music, rite of passage in playing patterns, breaking patterns, keeping patterns, polyrhythmic, keeping patterns together, there are life lessons in there. There are things that prepare one for this world that is built on cooperation and not competition. It's like I'm saying, this is not a miracle stuff. This is things that are practicable. You know, this is things that are doable, no matter how we are frustrated by it. So, in a way, this notion of nation building, and as much as one come from a post-nation, continental, you know, of unity within that measure of size. What we need to do is to counter-engineer, is it not? So where are the engineers? We were liberated, right? Those who engineered us out of this into that. These oaks, you know, that are now stinking rich for having navigated us into the doldrums. Where's the design? The intelligent design out of apartheid into this so-called post-apartheid. Where's it at? You know, where's the soundtrack for this liberation? This lightness, where is it? It's I mean, you know what I mean. So there's a larger project, and the project is really to find what unites us. What unites us? We've been divided, and we're reveling in the division. We want to celebrate the division. We want to make the division deeper, because we think that there's something of virtue to be found in a deep tribal identity, or in something as narrow as that. You know,
it's very interesting for me. I was talking about the example of Gabon earlier on, and what was amazingly fascinating for me was to see. I mean, when they say 40 different tribes, like, you know, I went to, and I was like, okay, well, really, how can you have 40 different tribes, but they're all Gabonese? But I went to a music event that they were doing, and in the music event, there were really 40 distinctive types of music, the way they sounded, the way they dressed, the language they were speaking. But they all, and I guess, again, when you talk about like unity, was they were united by this plant. You know, their sense of being Gabonese was that we all share in common this plant and this religion called Bwiti, but we're all quite distinctive culturally. Right. But the uniting thing is this plant, you know, and that's the thing that they're all onto. And it's actually one of the reasons why they're one of the first countries to kick the French colonists out of their country in the 1960s already, you know. So there's power in the plants. There's power in the things that move us sort of, you know, from a deep level. And we often ignore them, or we overlook them, or we don't even know about them. You know, we've been kept in the dark and chasing all sorts of things that actually don't serve us. And so I think it's really time for us to really go back to those sort of essential things. You were going to say something, Libby?
I was indeed. I just received a book for my birthday a couple of days ago, which is called In Bibi's Kitchen. And it is recipes from homes from all the countries of Africa that abut the Indian Ocean. So it's South Africa, Mozambique, you know, going all the way up into Eritrea and so forth. And I mean, it's an incredible book because, you know, relative to most cookbooks or kind of food fads that we've, you know, had, I would nearly say thrown at us. You know, if you think of sushi taking off and Thai food and Mexican food and, you know, foods from elsewhere, we're always kind of looking elsewhere for what our kind of food aspirations are. And for me to have this book in my hands where every single photograph is of brown hands, and the foods are foods from this continent, and humble foods. And, you know, it just it made my heart sing that this nice big fat book full of beautiful pictures is actually celebrating Africa in a way which for too long it just hasn't been. And you know, you'd always get a cookbook from another country and very few from Africa. So there's a changing tide of really wanting to, you know, to celebrate Africa and claim it as a continent that should be sung.
Yeah, and also, I mean, also looking at ways in which these sort of indigenous influences can also be then transposed into the modern context. I mean, I was looking you're making preserves out of Kai apple and all of it, blending things, and you know, it's familiar as a preserve, but obviously made with an ingredient that comes from like way back, and then. I mean, I know there's a guy in Observatory down the way, Tapi, yes, Tapi, who is just tell us a bit about what he does.
I think he's doing fantastic things. He's reconnecting people to indigenous ingredients through ice cream. I mean, how cool is that? You know, it just makes that whole thing of turning your back on the weeds or the poverty foods that so often our own foods are thought of as. I mean, who's going to refuse an ice cream, man? You know, and you go there and he's doing a different ice cream just about every time. I think he very seldom repeats an ice cream.
Yes.
And it's a fabulous way. It's a great entry point.
Yes.
For everybody.
Yes.
You know, we all just dig ice cream. I mean, who doesn't dig ice cream?
Yeah, and then you go there and it's made, the flavors, some indigenous African flavor that
reimagining.
Yeah.
You know,
what are some of the ingredients he's doing?
Well, he's used Kai apples.
Yes.
And he uses all sorts of herbs. I mean, gee whiskers, what he doesn't put in there. I mean, baobab. He's put so many things in, and he's incredibly intuitive and creative in the way in which he combines things. He's put amasi in, and he's put sorghum in, and you know, all sorts of ingredients that
are familiar
but which we just simply don't incorporate into our lives very much.
Yeah.
And he's just having a complete jaw.
Yes.
And he's approaching it with incredible intelligence and a sort of refinement as well. You know, so a real kind of reimagining. And I think that's a part of what we need to be doing with music, with food, and with our knowledge systems. That, you know, we don't get too stuck on trying to go back.
Yes.
But that actually we have what we have, and we kind of move in a sort of forward direction with it.
You know, what it also touches on is, like for instance, with our work around the bow, is to encourage each one to make their own bow. And what is invoked with that is to rekindle this identity of ourselves as tool makers and not as tool users, so that we're less prone to want to be given food and more thinking about making food, and getting into that mode,
and growing food.
Exactly, yeah. You know, to become the makers of, and not passive recipients of, which is a sort of a
very modern thing. It's a very sad modern thing.
Well, it comes with the dispossession of exactly that landscape, out of which people's familiarity with how to make a living with nothing. You know, where that resides. So dispossession and the colonial project and decolonialism is to do with that, you know. So people are not getting their lives back because there is no engineering for that to happen. You know, in fact, we just have another entity that is dividing us on new sets of rules for division, as if we are not like, you know, like cut out for it at this point, stopping us short from immediately engaging with it. Do we need how many years do we need to still bathe in this muck of post-apartheid scum that we are all can't wash off? Like, when do we want to get into this project? You know what I mean? Instead of getting this divide between rich and poor going, we're not hardly doing enough with what we've got, and the indigenous knowledge systems should function for us. It should be for us, you know, to get out of from where we are and engineer on the basis of what we have. That is our raw material that we don't need to go and get from anyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking Indigenous knowledge systems here. We were not able to get Dr. Brian Wilson on the line and Zandile Dumas, but if you are next to a computer and you want to find out exactly what Zandile in particular is doing, she's trying to use Indigenous knowledge systems and have them incorporated into for development, for economic development, for spiritual development, for particularly, I would guess among young people, and entrepreneurs, and trying to sort of, incorporate a lot of these things. So, this is the kind of work that needs to be done. I sometimes I'm a big fan of TikTok, and I sometimes watch. I see how a country even like China really makes a big deal of celebrating its history that goes back, into ancient times, 4,000 years ago. They'll romanticize and celebrate these things. Obviously they have this sort of long, unbroken history with, but there was some colonialism there at some point, Hong Kong and the Brits who tried to go there. But the fact that they really, as a diverse and vast country, really make an investment. We can talk about some of the issues around dictatorships in Africa, but there's some places. Gabon was run by the same dictator for decades. But he really made a point of investing in indigenous local culture, a festival of all the different tribes in the country for a week, we don't even do that here in South Africa. We make a big deal of talking about how there's 12 different languages and all this kind of thing. But is there a national platform where we all come and celebrate our diversity? Is there something like that?
Well, if it, not exactly that I know about, but what diversity also do we want to celebrate? I want us to what are the unities that are there to celebrate? I'm, for instance, thinking of the case of Tanzania with Julius Nyerere emerging as president, and where did he go to that which unites? It's reported also that he went to culture, right? Dance form and music form, which cuts below the cleavage of the divides that in modern time had come through things. So, for instance, if we look at Mandela taking rugby as something that unites, that's a strange, interesting grab of a rabbit out of a hat for that purpose. I think, in my humble opinion, there are things to really take and engage with, and I think, for instance, the mouth bow is one of those things. The bow ideally is sort of a shooter's thing, right? So a shooter's thing had climbed into the whole of southern Africa, right? Yes. Who does not play the bow? Who does not play the Bushman bow? It's the Bushman bow that they play, But the point of it is then that we all somehow can find common ground by standing on the bow. And what the bow does in its indigenous knowledge system scope and dynamic is it has rite of passage content for both the boy and the girl child. The roles that exchange. If you look at how the boy child engaged, what they need to go through, the rite of passage to engage with their own sense of femininity, their own wholeness was way more than this. Whatever Western society is structuring for us, this binary and this, you're either here or there, or you none, or you not, or So within just the vernacular of the bow,
there's a lot to be said. Speaking of the bow again, we're running out of time. We got 4 or 5 minutes, and so I was going to ask you just maybe to give us something else on the bow to get us nearly to the end of the show. Really apologies for not being able to get Dr. Brian Wilson on the line. We're probably going to have to. And Zandile Dumas up in Johannesburg. Just some technical problems here this evening. I don't know what that was about, but hopefully we can get them on a future show talking about it, because there's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot. We can have 2-3 shows about this issue. Yeah. So Glenn Aronser, Khoi Connection, playing the mouth bow. Thank you so much, Glenn, for that. That brings us to the end of the show. Luby, is there any last words you wanna leave our listeners with around food and getting back in touch? You said a lot, but is there anything you think you may have left out?
Yeah, I think that as human beings with two legs, we've always moved, and we've taken things with us when we've gone to new places, and we've suffered from what was brought here and imposed on here. But I think that for us as human beings, finding ways to make new cultural blendings from things that maybe aren't necessarily from our very, very own, very far back roots, but are actually about, I think of, for example, the Italians. You think tomatoes are Italian things, but no, they came from, South America, and chilies as well, which is completely all over Asia. And yet they are part of a very strong food tradition in those places. And in a way, that gives me hope for our continent, that we can make those kinds of new cultural blendings and claim and start new traditions.
Thank you, Luby. Glenn, keep it short.
Yeah, we were, as Khoi Connection, once performed at Montebello, and there were a spokesman on behalf of the Khoi and the Ngu invited to speak. And I think what they say is something, I think, significant. Mentioning to the audience that, metaphorically speaking, we weren't gone. And I'm coming back to this vacant space you were talking about when it opened up. We weren't gone. We're nomadic. We were migrating, and we came back and we brought you gifts.
Fantastic. The gifts of Indigenous knowledge that are still there if we care to look for them, unearth them, explore, and be open, as Luby said, to these experiences instead of shut off. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of another episode of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. If you stay tuned, you're going to be listening to the community champions right after this with... not with Noel Daniels this evening, he's a bit under the weather, with Danny Peterson, and she's going to be doing the Community Champions. And hope to see you here again with us next week for another episode of the Cornerstone Critical Dialogues. My name's Ryan Fortune, and it's been wonderful. Despite the technical hitches, it's been amazing to be in the studio and talking about all these issues. Please go out there and explore and Google. Google is your friend, and Wikipedia. You'll find a lot there.
unlearning proposes that new ways of learning can only be acquired when individuals unlearn those thoughts, those emotions, and those behaviors that prevent us from fully flourishing in the world.
2 weeks into this course, my heart already knew that my entire viewpoint on humanity was going to change.
During the years that I've worked with Taryn, she has assisted me in seeing the potential as an individual, and the course has changed my life for the better. I am the person that I am today because of the course that I enrolled for.
I've been lecturing the content for 7 years, and every year I am in awe of students who share how the content has transformed them both academically and personally. I believe that the world right now is in desperate need of an education that equips individuals with both academic and personal development skills.
Before this course happened, I used to hate people from the bottom of my soul. But after this course, for the first time in my life, I can say that I no longer hate people. I can finally say that I no longer see people for their circumstances, but rather for who they are as people and who they can become.
The things that I learned in my early childhood about who I was not and who I was supposed to be. However, the course showed me the true identity of myself. It showed me that it was okay to be vulnerable. It showed me that it was okay to heal. And throughout the course, I have grown tremendously.
And the unlearning course does that. I realized that the content was so powerfully transformative that it would be irresponsible, that it would be selfish for me not to share it with the world. Unlearning is really a course that I've been lecturing for 7 years, but I've made it bigger, I've made it better, and I'm excited to incorporate the performing arts. I do not believe that unlearning needs to be clinical and boring. We can also make unlearning entertaining and fun.
To anyone that would want to enroll in this course, it will not only benefit you academically, but also individually. It will assist you in presenting yourself as the true individual that you are, but it will also assist you in healing and journeying the life process.
This course was the missing puzzle piece that I needed in my journey of self-transformation and self-discovery. And most of all, this course taught me how to unlearn this toxic behavior and how to choose happiness and positivity in the present and to stop worrying about tomorrow.
The gift of this course is that it is universally applicable to any personal and professional context. Cornerstone, learn to change the world.
In this time of great uncertainty, there's one thing you can be certain of: your education. Our wide range of online programs let you upskill yourself and earn a leading-edge qualification from the comfort of your own home. We've been educating Africa for 50 years, so we know how to adapt to our forever changing landscape. Learn to change the world and take control today. Speak to one of our student advisors. Visit cornerstone.ac.za to enroll now.